European leaders, President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky, all echoed calls for a trilateral meeting between Russia and Ukraine. And they're putting pressure on Russia. Just minutes ago, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer made a statement going a step further, threatening more sanctions if Russia does not stop its assault. And Zelensky agreed. He said that he has stressed that sanctions should be strengthened if there is no trilateral meeting or if Russia tries to evade an end to the war. Shortly after getting back to Joint Base Andrews from his Anchorage summit with Putin, President Trump posted details about their meeting online. He revealed that he's pushing for a full peace deal by passing a ceasefire altogether. He says Zelensky would come to D.C. on Monday, and if that works out, they would schedule a meeting with Putin. Trump and Putin's meeting Friday in Alaska lasted about 3 hours and ended with neither president answering questions immediately after. We, of course, have team coverage this morning with CNN's Nick Payton-Walsh and Elena Treen breaking down those overnight developments. Let's start with Nick Payton-Walsh live in Kyiv. What more are you learning about these European leaders, the guarantees that they're discussing, and President Trump's cooperation with those guarantees?
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously these are early signs of what was discussed in Alaska, or more specifically with the European leaders and Zelensky, and the calls that Trump made after his clearly not particularly happy meeting with Putin. Now, the security guarantees are important because they clearly would act as a kind of sweetener for Ukraine to get involved in a deal that may have concessions not to its liking. The sweetener, well, as far as I understand from a European official, what Trump has potentially begun discussing with the Europeans is Article 5 type security guarantees. Now, that is a reference to the NATO Charter clause of collective defence. An attack on one is an attack on all. I should stress there's no suggestion that Ukraine becomes part of NATO or that necessarily NATO is enforcing that Article 5 guarantee. This is essentially a way of describing the kind of unity that Ukraine might benefit from these security guarantees. French President Emmanuel Macron has gone on social media to say that there is a willingness to contribute to security guarantees from the United States. We have heard President Trump make references to security guarantees, but it's the sort of ironclad nature of this, that's a phrase used by one of the European leaders, that will be enticing to Kiev. I should point out there's some trust deficit here. They had security guarantees in the mid-90s when they gave up their nuclear weapons here in Ukraine and still got invaded by Russia twice. So I think it's a positive thing, potentially, for Kiev to wake up and hear, but a sweetener presumably has a bitter pill that has to be swallowed as well. And there are two things clearly that are problematic this morning for Ukraine. The first is that we've seemed now to have dropped the idea of an immediate ceasefire being required. In fact, the most recent social media post seems to suggest that Zelensky accepts that the way forward now is going to be a quick deal that's permanent rather than a short ceasefire that potentially could allow Russia to invade again. That was not Ukraine or Europe's position just 48 hours ago. They wanted a ceasefire first. Now, Trump's social media post has said that everyone agrees a quick peace deal that lasts, I paraphrase here, is better than an immediate ceasefire. That's a win for Putin, because an immediate ceasefire means his troops have to stop fighting and stop winning and advancing on the front lines. Yes, potentially for Ukraine, a serious, lasting peace deal would be a win. The second downside here, too, is, according to another European official I've spoke to, is that the meeting in Alaska did not show a Vladimir Putin whose demands had changed. He was still pretty maximalist, still saying he wants all of the Donbass region, which his troops are currently fighting for and winning in, and more time will allow them to advance better in their positions. He's winning that time, too. He clearly showed no public desire to give concessions next to Trump. That probably rattled Trump, frankly, who didn't take questions, didn't have lunch, and even said in an interview with Fox News he kind of wished he hadn't given the interview. So it's been obviously a not ideal set of circumstances in Alaska. The issue now, of course, is with the meeting on Monday in the Oval Office again. The pressure is on Zelensky to concede, to agree, to go along with what Trump wants, and that's the problem really here in Ukraine. They've been there before.
Nick, let me follow up with I want to draw a clearer line between that bitter pill that you say that they'd have to swallow. Would that be to give up that land to Putin, to Russia, in order to get that security guarantee?
Yeah, I mean, we don't know, unfortunately. We don't know whether the idea that Trump has in his mind is to give Putin the land that he wants and then have the remainder of Ukraine held by Ukraine, guaranteed by some kind of security arrangement. That's clearly under discussion. I should stress again, repeatedly, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has said no to territorial concessions. It would be politically toxic here. It would be practically, virtually impossible to turn around to a thriving town like Slavyansk or Kramatorsk, where we were just earlier in the week, and say everyone out in a matter of weeks, because this is now going to be Russia. So I think that's the big challenge here, and the Europeans obviously think the idea of giving Vladimir Putin territory without even a fight is foolish. But that may be what's beginning to be formulated, unclear. And as we know, this is changing day by day, hour by hour. Red lines, things that were demanded 1 minute, evaporate minutes later. And while we clearly will see some anxiety in Ukraine about what may follow in the weeks ahead, they woke today to not the worst news. Putin and Trump didn't come up with some kind of overnight peace deal that Zelensky had to accept. Yeah. Security guarantees is something Ukraine very much wants, but there's clearly going to be a real problem here in the concessions Ukraine may get asked to make.
Nick Paton-Walsh for us in Kyiv. Nick, thank you. Let's go now to CNN White House reporter Elena Treen. Trump has repeatedly brushed off the possibility of Ukraine joining NATO. And that's not on the table here, although there's this discussion of Article 5 style protections. I wonder, is it just clear to assume that this is going to be part of the conversation on Monday?
When it comes to NATO, I don't think so. I mean, I think President Trump, has been very clear that he doesn't think that part of this negotiation is going to be having Ukraine become a member. You've heard him say repeatedly over the last year, really, even before he came back into office, that he believes that's what started the war in the first place. So I don't believe that NATO membership is likely going to be on the table here. But this idea of security guarantees, potentially we could see President Trump getting there if that means that this could help, sweeten the deal, as Nick put it, for the Ukrainians. I'd note, of course, that having the U.S. being heavily invested and committing to security guarantees is something we have not heard President Trump really commit to just yet. He's often tried to push that and say the onus is on the United States, European allies, to ensure that Ukraine's security is prosperous following whatever deal could potentially be had. But again, as Nick said as well, we really just don't know at this point. We don't have a good sense of what was discussed behind closed doors between President Trump and President Putin, and it's unclear as well whether Ukraine would even accept some of the things that we know might have been discussed, or as Trump put it yesterday during that press conference, that they had agreed to a lot of things, but there's no deal until there's a deal, essentially saying it is up to the Ukrainians really at this point to decide if they are willing to go there. Two things I want to reiterate that Nick brought up. One is, of course, we're going to see Zelensky at the White House on Monday. He's coming to Washington. That is a good sign, potentially. We'll see if those talks are well. We heard the president say he's hoping that could lead to another meeting with having both Putin and Zelensky in the same room. But one thing that is also unclear, and Trump brought this up yesterday, is this idea of whether he's willing to move forward with sanctions. We did see Zelensky just moments ago say that he believes sanctions are a necessary tool, that they are a good tool. Trump yesterday, however, said he's not thinking about that at the moment. Listen to how he put it.
Because of what happened today, I think I don't have to think about that. Now, I may have to think about it in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or something, but we don't have to think about that right now. I think the meeting went very well.
So essentially, he's saying he's going to put sanctions off, the idea of these, economic consequences for Russia off by a few weeks as they continue to negotiate. And that has really been a key question of whether or not he would move forward with the pressure that he's now threatened on Russia repeatedly and then pulled back on those vows while waiting to see how Russia responded. So that's still a question as well. But one of the biggest things I think we are learning today is from what we saw the president share this morning, which is that after he had spoken with Zelensky and other European leaders on his way back from Alaska to Washington, is this idea that he is pushing for a fuller long-term peace agreement and kind of abandoning this idea of a ceasefire. I'd note that that's very different. It's a notable shift from where Trump's mindset was yesterday, just heading over to that summit in Anchorage. He had been telling reporters that he knew and he was being told by his team that a ceasefire was unlikely, but that he would be very unhappy if they did not reach one. And so we are now seeing that shift as well following that meeting yesterday with Vladimir Putin. All to say, we'll have to see where this goes. I think Monday is going to be a very, very important day for the future of these talks, Victor.
Indeed it will be. Elena Treen, thank you so much.